Picture it for a second. A few hundred acres, a herd of cattle grazing under a big sky, a horse tied outside a barn you built yourself, a dog running alongside your truck at sunset. That's the image most people have. Here's the problem. That image is a hobby, and the thing you're about to spend seven figures on is a commodity business with some of the thinnest margins in American agriculture. Here's what almost nobody tells you before they buy the land. A ranch isn't a lifestyle product. It's a leveraged bet on the price of beef, the price of hay, the price of diesel, and the weather, all four of which you don't control, none of which move in your favor at the same time, and all of which can wreck you in a single bad year. You think you're buying a piece of land with animals on it. You're actually buying a low-margin manufacturing operation where the factory floor is 600 acres of grass, and the machines are alive, eat every single day, whether they're profitable or not, and can die of things you didn't see coming. That's the real business. Keep that in your head because we're going to come back to it. Most people who dream about ranch ownership are picturing the equity, not the operation. They see land values that have gone up for decades in most cattle regions, and they think that's the return. It's not. Land appreciation is a real thing, and it matters. We'll get to it. But the actual cattle operation running on top of that land is frequently break-even or worse in any given year. People who buy ranches to run cattle full-time are often functionally land speculators who happen to also run a low-margin agricultural business to justify the ag tax exemption and cover part of the carrying cost. That's not cynicism, that's how the numbers actually work. So let's talk about what it actually costs to get into this. A working cattle ranch, capable of running enough animals to be a real business, not a hobby, needs somewhere between 300 and 1,500 acres depending on your region. Because in places like West Texas or Eastern Montana, you might need 25 to 40 acres to support one cow-calf pair for a year. While in better grass regions like parts of Nebraska or Missouri, you might only need 5 to 10 acres per pair. Land prices swing wildly by state, from around $1,500 an acre in parts of eastern Montana or the Texas Panhandle to $8,000 to $15,000 an acre in better cattle country in the Midwest. Run the math on even a modest 600-acre operation, and you're looking at $1.5 million to $4 million just for dirt before a single cow sets foot on it. Then comes the herd itself. A bred cow, ready to calve, runs $1,800 to $2,800 depending on the market cycle. And cattle prices have been historically volatile, sometimes swinging 30% in a single year based on drought conditions and national herd size. To run a real operation, you need at minimum 80 to 150 head, which means another $150,000 to $400,000 just in livestock. Add fencing, and this is the part nobody budgets for correctly. Perimeter and cross-fencing for 600 acres, done properly with actual cattle-grade wire and posts, runs $8,000 to $15,000 per mile, and a property that size can easily need 6 to 10 miles of it. That's another $60,000 to $150,000. Add a working water system, because cattle need access to water in every pasture, or they won't graze it evenly, and you're looking at wells, pipelines, and troughs running another $30,000 to $80,000. Then equipment. Tractors, hay balers, a stock trailer, working chutes for vaccinations and branding, a decent truck that can pull a livestock trailer. Used, if you're smart about it, that's still $150,000 to $300,000. Add it up and you're at a minimum of $2 million on the low end, more realistically $3 to $6 million to buy in as a real operation, not a 5-acre hobby with 2 horses. And the mistake that kills first-year ranchers almost every time isn't the land or the cattle. It's underestimating the working capital cushion. A cow-calf operation doesn't generate revenue every week like a restaurant. You're selling calves once, maybe twice a year. That means you need 12 to 18 months of operating cash sitting in reserve covering feed, vet bills, fuel, and your own living expenses before that first real payday arrives. People who skip that step, who buy the land and the cattle and think the ranch will fund itself from day one, are usually selling within 3 years, often at a loss, because one bad drought or one bad calf crop with no cushion behind it is enough to force a fire sale. Now here's the part of this genre I actually love, the 2-number comparison, because ranching is full of them, and this one will change how you think about the whole business. Compare a $2,500 bread cow to a $40 bag of quality alfalfa hay. On the surface, the cow looks like the asset. It's the big purchase, the thing people photograph, the thing that feels like ownership. The hay looks like a rounding error, something you buy every week without thinking about it. Here's the actual math. That $2,500 cow, if she's productive, will produce one calf a year for roughly 8 to 10 years. And each of those calves sells for somewhere between $900 and $1,400, depending on the market. Do the multiplication, and that single cow, over her productive life, generates somewhere around $8,000 to $12,000 in gross revenue. Not bad. But here's the number that actually determines whether you make money or not. A cow eats roughly 2.5 to 3% of her body weight in feed per day, which for a 1,200-pound cow works out to roughly 30 pounds of forage a day, every single day, for the entire year, whether she's pregnant, nursing, or just standing there. Over a year, that's somewhere around 5 to 6 tons of hay and grazed forage per animal. And in a drought year, when your own pasture can't support her, you're buying that hay at market price. That small boring cost, the $40 bags and the $200 a ton hauled in loads, adds up to $800 to $1,500 per cow per year in feed costs alone during a bad grazing year. Multiply that across a 100-head herd, and feed alone can be $80,000 to $150,000 in a single tough season. The cow gets the glory. The hay bill is what actually decides whether you're profitable. That's the ranching business in one comparison. The unglamorous recurring cost, not the flashy asset, is what runs the show. Let's follow $100 of revenue from the moment a calf sells at auction to what actually lands in your pocket. Because this is where the fantasy really dies. That calf sells for $100. Take out the sale barn commission and yardage fees, roughly 3 to 4%, and you're down to about $96.50. Take out trucking to get that calf to the auction in the first place, because most ranches aren't next door to a sale barn, and that's another $2 to $4 depending on distance, so you're at roughly $93. Now subtract the actual cost of raising that calf for the year it took to get it to sale weight. Feed and supplemental hay runs somewhere around $25 to $35 of that 100, depending on how much of the year was on free pasture versus purchased feed. Veterinary care, vaccinations, and mineral supplements run another $4 to $6. Fencing and water system maintenance, prorated per head, run another $3 to $5. Fuel for the tractor and truck, moving hay, checking cattle, running equipment, another $5 to $8. Property taxes and insurance, prorated across the herd, another $4 to $6. Equipment depreciation, because that tractor and that baler aren't lasting forever, another $6 to $9. Labor, even if it's just you, has a real cost. And if you're paying yourself or a hired hand a fair wage for the hours a cattle operation actually demands, that's another $15 to $20 of that $100. Add it all up, and out of that original $100, somewhere between $65 and $80 goes straight back out the door in direct costs. What's left, the actual profit that lands in the owner's pocket after every single input, is somewhere between $12 and $22 on every $100 of gross calf revenue in a normal year. In a drought year with purchase feed, that number can go negative. Not thin margins, negative margins. That's the reality behind the postcard. Now, the hidden trap, and this is the one that's specific to ranching, not generic small business risk. It's not competition. It's not even the weather directly, though weather triggers it. It's herd liquidation risk during drought. And here's exactly how it plays out. A drought hits your region, your pasture stops producing grass, you now have two choices, neither of them good. Option 1. You buy hay to replace the grass your land isn't producing. At exactly the moment when everyone else in your region is also buying hay because they're in the same drought, which means hay prices spike 30 to 60% right when you need the most of it. Option 2. You sell off part of your herd to reduce the number of mouths you're feeding, which sounds reasonable until you realize every other rancher in a drought-stricken region is doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, flooding the market with cattle for sale and crashing the price you get for them by 20 to 40%. So you're forced to either buy feed at peak prices or sell cattle at trough prices, sometimes both in the same season. And the part that makes this genuinely brutal is that rebuilding a herd after a forced liquidation takes years, not months. If you sell off 60 of your 100 breeding cows during a bad drought, you don't just buy 60 new cows the following spring. Bred cows are expensive and in short supply right after regional droughts, because everyone's trying to rebuild at once, which pushes replacement cow prices up right when you're trying to buy back in. Ranchers who lived through the major drought cycles of the last 2 decades will tell you the same thing. It's not the drought year itself that ends operations. It's the 2 or 3 years afterward, trying to rebuild a herd at inflated prices with a smaller revenue base, that quietly bleeds people out of the business. So let's look at the same operation run 2 different ways, because this is where ownership actually starts to separate winners from people who slowly go broke while telling themselves they're fine. Take a 100-head cow-calf operation generating $115,000 in gross annual revenue from calf sales. Run poorly, that operation looks like this. Feed and hay, because pasture management is an afterthought and rotational grazing isn't being practiced, runs $38,000. Veterinary and health costs, reactive instead of preventive, meaning you're paying for emergencies instead of routine care, run $9,000. Equipment costs balloon to $16,000 because machinery isn't maintained on schedule and breaks down at the worst times. Fuel and hauling run $11,000 because there's no route planning. Labor, unmanaged and often duplicated, runs $22,000. Interest on operating loans, because there's no cash cushion so everything's financed short-term at high rates, runs $8,000. Add property taxes and insurance at $7,000, total expenses, $111,000. On $115,000 of revenue, that's $4,000 of profit. Basically nothing, for a full year of physical labor and multi-million-dollar capital at risk. Now run the same $115,000 in revenue through an operation that's actually managed. Rotational grazing extends the usable grazing season and cuts purchased hay significantly, bringing feed costs down to $22,000. Preventive vet care and a proper vaccination protocol reduce emergency costs to $6,000. Equipment is maintained on a schedule, and some jobs are done with owned rather than rented equipment at the right times, bringing that cost to $11,000. Fuel and hauling, planned efficiently, run $7,000. Labor, whether it's the owner working efficiently or one well-managed hired hand instead of 2 disorganized ones, runs $16,000. A cash reserve means minimal reliance on high-interest operating loans, bringing interest costs down to $2,000. Taxes and insurance stay at $7,000, total expenses, $71,000. On the exact same $115,000 in revenue, that's $44,000 in profit. Same land, same herd size, same market. The difference between $4,000 and $44,000 a year isn't luck. It's operational discipline, and in this business, that discipline is worth more than almost any single purchasing decision you'll make. Zoom out, and there are real structural forces reshaping this industry right now that most people thinking about buying a ranch don't know about. The national cattle herd has been shrinking for years, sitting near multi-decade lows, which has actually pushed calf prices up significantly and made cow-calf operations more profitable than they've been in a long time, at least on the revenue side. At the same time, land prices in good cattle country have kept climbing, driven partly by actual ranchers and partly by outside investors and recreational buyers who don't need the operation to cash flow because they're buying for appreciation, hunting rights, or tax status, which is quietly pricing traditional operators out of expansion. Technology is changing daily operations too, with GPS-monitored virtual fencing collars starting to replace physical cross-fencing in some operations, cutting fencing costs dramatically for ranches willing to adopt it early. And consolidation is happening at the processing level, where a small number of major meat packers control the vast majority of cattle processing capacity in the country. which means individual ranchers have less and less leverage over the price they're actually paid at sale, regardless of how well they run their own operation. If you're getting into this, understanding that squeeze between rising land costs and concentrated buyer power downstream matters more than almost anything else in the long-term math. If you found any of this useful so far, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because we break down the real numbers behind businesses like this every week, and it genuinely helps the channel when you do. So let's come back to where we started. You think you're buying a piece of land with cattle on it. What you're actually buying is a leveraged commodity operation where the land is the collateral, the herd is the inventory, and the real asset, the thing that actually determines whether this makes you money over 20 years, is the grass. Specifically, how much grass your specific acres can grow without purchased inputs, because that number determines your feed costs, and your feed costs determine your margin. In a business where margin is already down in the 12 to 20% range in a good year and negative in a bad one. The land appreciation is real, and over a couple of decades in the right region, it can be the actual return that makes the whole thing worth it. But the day-to-day operation, the thing most people picture when they picture ranch ownership, is a low-margin agricultural business that punishes undercapitalization and rewards operational discipline more than almost any other small business category out there. So does it make sense to own a ranch? Honestly, it depends on three things. Whether you're buying in a region with genuinely strong native grass, so your feed costs stay low in a normal year, whether you've got the working capital cushion to survive at least one bad drought cycle without a forced liquidation, and whether you're being honest with yourself about whether the return you're actually chasing is the cattle operation or the land underneath it. Because those are two different investments wearing the same cowboy hat. Get those three things right, and a ranch can be one of the more durable, generational assets a family can own. Get them wrong, and it's one of the fastest ways in American business to turn a few $1,000,000 into a very expensive hobby. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, stick around and subscribe. We do this with a new business every week, and it's the numbers, not the postcard, that actually tell you whether something's worth owning.